Dangerously close.
My guest today is Nathaniel Stinnett. Nathaniel is the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project, a nonpartisan nonprofit that uses data analytics and behavioral science to mobilize environmentalists to vote. Named one of the 5 global climate visionaries by the New York Times in 2018 and dubbed the voting guru by Grist magazine, Stinnett is a frequent expert speaker on cutting-edge campaign techniques and the behavioral science behind getting people to vote. He has held a variety of senior leadership and campaign manager positions on the U.S. Senate, congressional, state, and mayoral campaigns. And he sits on the board of advisors for MIT's Environmental Solutions Initiative. He holds a BA from Yale University and a JD from Boston College Law School. And he lives in Boston with his wife and 2 children. What's up, Nathaniel?
Hey, Doug. I am so excited for this conversation.
Do you mind, before I ask you any of my first questions, do you mind if I share just like a short thing about why this is so important to me, and not on a global scale, but on a local scale?
Not only do I not mind that, I would love that. Yeah,
because obviously, climate change is important to me on a global scale. The environment, everything, and that's how a lot of us think on this major scale. But it's also really important to think about like what it's like at home. And for me, where I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I would say like over the past 10 years, especially, I think it's made some news that so much of our wildlife, our forests, our rivers, waterways have been devastated by developers and industry because the regulations just aren't there to protect these wild spaces. And it's one of those things where, I want to know what it is that I need to do. What's it going to take for me to get elected officials in here that take this seriously, that don't just let developers and industrial projects, destroy habitats. That's something. So it's something that I see in my very own home where I live. I can drive past the thing where I'm like, oh, that used to be green space. That used to be, this river used to be clean. You could go in it, with you could swim in it, and now you shouldn't. And so that's something I just wanted to share from my own personal perspective and why what you do is so important to me. So I just wanted to throw that out there first.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad that you did, because I think everybody, no matter how much you know or don't know about the environmental crises that we face, it can't help but think of them as these huge, enormous, global scale problems. And they are. I mean, don't get me wrong, but they also have very real local stories and ramifications. And it's so important to understand those, because ultimately, most people care about environmental issues because they care about human beings. And, human beings don't live on a global scale. They live on a local scale. And so it's so important to hear stories like that, because, these big problems, they do impact individuals and their daily lives, and in really, really awful ways. So I'm so glad you shared that story.
And just for instance, and I don't want to go on and on and on about Nashville, but I live in a downtown area, and it's something you didn't used to see quite so much. But I see a lot of like foxes, coyotes, deer, but they're like, in the street, like they're in these major roads that, where people are going 60 miles an hour. Or I see them on my own street, which is not, people go 60 miles an hour down my street. They're not supposed to, but
mine too.
but the thing is, at first I go, oh, cool, a fox. Oh, cool, a deer. Like I like to see the wildlife, but then I get sad because I realize the reason that I'm seeing them in my neighborhood is because all of the habitat that they should be in it's gone. And I want to hope and I want to believe that it's not irreversible. But I guess, that's maybe a subject for another day, is, how much can we save and how much can we replace? But I guess what I really want to jump into is actually, this is what you do in your organization, of course. And that's I guess like, but let's start from the very beginning with how was the excuse me, the environmental voter project created?
Yeah. So I founded it in 2015. And the reason I created it was, I come to this space, Doug, not from the environmental world or the climate world. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a policy guru. Uh, I came to it from the political world. I'm a political hack. But I've always cared deeply about climate and environmental issues. And I was working on campaigns big and small, as you mentioned in your intro. And, I wasn't going to work for a candidate who didn't also care about climate and environmental issues. But every time we would look at polling data to figure out, okay, what are the voters in this election that we're trying to win? Like, what do they care about? Climate and environmental issues were way, way down towards their list of priorities. And that was enormously frustrating.
Yeah.
Because if you are trying to win an election, you have limited time and limited money. And believe me, you can't use that limited time and limited money talking about the thing that voters don't really care about. That's not how you win elections.
Yeah.
And to be honest, Doug, I didn't see a way out of it. I just thought like, oh my God, well, boy, does that suck. And purely by chance, after running a mayoral election here in Boston in 2013, I was taking some time off. Our first kid was about to be born. And I was looking at some polling data with a buddy of mine, and I saw something that totally blew my mind. And that was that in this poll, and it was a poll of midterm voters in 2014, so we're going way back here, 9 years. Sure enough, people who were likely to vote in the midterms listed climate, like 2% of them listed climate as their top priority. Really small number.
Wow, just 2%?
Just 2%, I know. But I wasn't that surprised by it. I'm like, yeah, okay, this is what I'm used to seeing. But when we looked at all the people who weren't likely to vote, it was up at 5 or 6%. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? And I started to look at other polls, and I kept on seeing this same thing. And it started to dawn on me that maybe the reason so few voters cared about climate and the environment was simply because all of the people who cared weren't voting. In other words, it wasn't a persuasion problem as much as it was a turnout problem. And to make a long story short, that ended up leading to the Environmental Voter Project. And what we focus on is not trying to change people's hearts and minds. We don't try to find people who are voting and convince them to care about climate, or convince them to care about the environment, or convince them to care about habitat loss.
Yeah.
That's hard. We want to skip all the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Instead, we find the people who already care but aren't voting, and then just try to change their behavior, which certainly isn't easy, but it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to change people's minds. And so that's what led to me starting this nonprofit. And we have a very narrow focus. We don't endorse candidates. We don't try to persuade people to care about climate or the environment. We just find the ones who are already with us, but they suck at voting.
Yeah.
And we work year round with cutting edge behavioral science, just trying to change their habits, trying to turn them into better voters, kind of like a personal trainer would work with you year round to try to change your exercise habits or your eating habits. Well, we do the same thing, but we try to make an army of environmental voters.
Yeah. That's amazing. First of all, I mean, I know a little bit, I've read about the project, and but still hearing you say it like that, first of all, you blew me away with the 2%. I cannot believe that's, because for someone like me, I would say, like, if I had to list my priorities, environment's at the top. If like when I go to vote, that's, if there's a bill or anything that has something like, that's going to be the most important thing I feel like I'm voting on there. So it's kind of surprises me that so few people, but I mean, it is, like you said, it's very encouraging to know that there are lots of people that do feel the same as me. It's just they haven't been motivated to go vote yet, or now they are, or a lot more of them are.
Yeah. And And I think you're right to react that way, Doug. Uh, the first thing I'll say is, it's no longer 2%. So that's the good news.
Yeah.
Depending on the election, 4 to 5 to 6% of voters list climate or other environmental issues as their top priority. But that's still way too low, right? I mean, at the end of the day, politicians just really want to get elected. And so they're going to focus on the stuff that 20 or 25% of voters say is their top priority. And so, it's really important to understand that one of the biggest things holding us back, and by us, I mean, people who care deeply about climate and environmental issues, is simply our lack of political power. We can't push politicians around the way a lot of other issue groups can. And we need to change that. We need more political power, period.
Yeah. Can I ask a question that maybe like this is such a broad and enormous question? It's just kind of like everything you've been saying, you just kind of like put this in my mind, and I'm curious. Just to me, when I think about like let's just say just climate change, like not even talking about habitat loss or some of the things that I find to be like a little bit more heart-wrenching, when you see it happen, but climate, which is like an imminent threat to life on this planet, and not just mass extinction of species that are not human, but it could be, we could be seeing climate refugees from Phoenix with the rising temperatures in just the city of Phoenix alone. That city is going to become uninhabitable because of policies and the fact that they won't stop building golf courses. I'm not going on a tangent. I'm just saying, why do you think that and it's totally fine I know this is a huge complex issue, but why do you think this is not something that's on the radar of more people? Why is this not a 25% issue?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with a lot of the biases that are kind of hardwired into our brains. Our brains have been conditioned over millions of years of evolution to not be like a radar that constantly has 5 billion little blips on it, right?
Yeah.
Like we can't notice everything. We have to focus on just a few things, or like we'd go nuts.
Yeah.
And for most people, not everybody, but for most people, there are far more present issues. And so we tend to bias and focus on those present issues, right? Being able to buy groceries, being able to, if you've got an internal combustion engine, like being able to fill up your car with gas, or what's going on at my kid's school and things like that. And so these are what we are conditioned to focus on. And then the second thing is, and I think this is something that's really important to understand when we're talking about politics, and that is the difference between preferences and priorities.
Okay.
There are huge majorities of people in the United States, like really huge majorities, 60, 70%, who would prefer government action on climate change and would prefer government action on environmental protection. Like these are actually very popular issues.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they are salient. That doesn't mean they're top of mind. That doesn't mean they are the most important issue that people are carrying around in their heads.
Okay.
And that's a big difference. That's a big difference because just because 80% of Floridians prefer oranges to apples, doesn't mean that's going to be a hot political problem, right? And similarly, just because most Americans care about the climate crisis doesn't mean it's a top priority. And so that means that politicians can ignore it. And they can especially ignore it when there are fossil fuel companies spending such an absurd amount of money on political campaigns. And so those are the two big things that are making this very, very big problem avoidable for current day politicians, because it is not salient and it is not present, at least for most people.
Yeah. I do want to, and I promise not to go off like I have I've been known to do in the past on this
Go
subject.
off, man. It's
But
your show. Go off.
I have a I think I consider it like a little bit of an analogy. Maybe that's the wrong word for it, but when I think about fossil fuel industry, dark money in politics, and when I think about the tobacco industry, like let's say from not 15 years ago, let's say 20 years ago, when people were trying to say tobacco kills you, it gives you cancer and emphysema, and tobacco, like the tobacco lobby was so powerful, it could keep, like, Congress kept just not passing the laws, not doing it. There was like, it was like a juggernaut. But the crazy thing is, if you compare the amount of money that the tobacco industry had compared to what the fossil fuel industry had, they're not even comparable industries. It's like an ant and an elephant. I mean, like, tobacco is not it's not in the same realm as gasoline and petroleum and plastic. And it's so something for people to keep in mind. If you witnessed how powerful the tobacco lobby was 20 years ago, and you compare that to something that's exponentially more powerful, like for instance, the fossil fuel industry, you got to really see what we're up against it's a lot more.
That's exactly right. Additionally, the tobacco industry didn't have the single most powerful political weapon that the fossil fuel industry has, and that is the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision.
Yeah.
So in 2010, when Citizens United essentially said, yeah, corporations are allowed to spend unlimited political dollars, that changed everything. Everything. I mean, climate and environmental issues have been partisan for a while. I don't want to pretend that like there used to be this perfect, like, non-partisan utopia that we used to live in. Like, no, they've always been a little partisan. But holy moly, in 2010, Citizens United changed everything. Because at that point, it became close to impossible for Republicans to win primaries unless they did the bidding of the fossil fuel industry in most districts.
Yeah.
And
I would say that Citizens United is the single most destructive decision ever made by a government body.
Yes.
I'll say that straight face.
Yeah. I mean, whether it's like John McCain or Newt Gingrich or a whole bunch of U.S. senators, I mean, Republicans understood climate science. They wanted to address the climate crisis. And then, in a matter of months, people became climate deniers. Now, your listeners can't see me using air quotes here.
Yeah.
Like they weren't climate deniers. It isn't like they forgot science.
Yeah.
No, they were climate liars. All of a sudden, they could not win elections accepting science and pushing particular policies. And they had to start pushing different policies. And obviously that is depressing. It is frustrating. It makes us angry. But also at its core is, I think, a somewhat hopeful realization. And that is that this isn't some deeply held belief. It isn't like there are a whole bunch of politicians walking around Washington, D.C., who are just motivated each morning by the idea of destroying the environment. Like, no, they're not like that. What they're motivated by is winning elections. And right now, the easiest way for them to win elections is, for a lot of people, is to get a lot of fossil fuel industry money behind them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way if we start flooding the polls, not with fossil fuel money, but with environmental voters, because then we can start winning elections.
It's almost as if, you could say, not to be silly, but that a lot of our senators and members of the House are, let's say, it's like they are servers in a restaurant. And the restaurant, let's say, is owned by the fossil fuel industry, and everything on the menu is bad. But it's their job to tell the customers that it's good. And if they don't tell the customers the food's good, then the restaurant's going to fire them and they don't get to be a senator anymore. I mean, if you want to just kind of flat out say, these guys are employees of the fossil fuel industry first and foremost before that they are a public servant.
Yeah, or just that they're far more transactional than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
I mean, I run a nonpartisan organization, but personally, as I'm sure comes as no surprise to you, I'm a fairly progressive person. But I don't want to, make it seem like this is purely a conservative or a Republican problem.
Yeah.
Like Democratic politicians need to go where the votes are too.
Yeah.
It's the basic arithmetic of how politics works. Either you go where the votes are, or you don't get to be a politician anymore.
Yeah.
That's quite simply how
Yeah.
it works. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that it becomes harder and harder for politicians to win elections unless they are leading on environmental issues. And
Yeah.
obviously, there are going to be lots of states and lots of districts where we just can't make that happen. And certainly, Citizens United makes it harder. But at the end of the day, even with all of the money sloshing around politics, and even with gerrymandering and all this stuff that warps the marketplace, at the end of the day, it's all about who gets more votes.
Yeah.
Which means it's all about whether we show up or not and force politicians to do our bidding. And so we still have power, not as much as fossil fuel companies, but in a lot of places we can still beat them.
And in that, yeah, exactly. And for instance, just some of the stuff I was reading about, like what you've done with the Environmental Voter Project, it is the numbers, and it doesn't matter. In some ways, it doesn't matter how much money, how much dark money gets dumped into these television ads and these social media ads. If you've added 8 million new voters into the population who take the environment as their number one priority, the guy, the guy that's shilling for Exxon, it's not going to win because there's not enough people that are going to fall for it. So yeah, there's hope.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I think we all understand, but it's rarely explicitly stated when we read all these stories about the money being spent in politics. Like,
yeah,
if you are a fossil fuel, front company or super PAC or things like that, you're not taking wads of cash and putting them in a politician's pocket. Like, the money isn't for the politicians. The money is being spent trying to collect voters to vote for the candidate that you want to win.
Yeah.
So it always comes down to voters. Like nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election.
Yeah.
And so it always comes down to voters. And that doesn't mean that fossil fuel money isn't powerful. Oh my gosh, it's extraordinarily powerful. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's about voters. And yeah, boy, are you right, Doug. If we can get the millions of super environmentalists out there who normally don't vote to start voting regularly, I mean, there's no amount of fossil fuel money that's going to be able to overcome that in most states, not everywhere, but in most states.
And I guess this is actually the perfect time for my next question. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but my next question is like, what is the mission of the environmental sorry, I keep misspeaking when I say it. The Environmental Voter Project. Sorry. Anyway,
that's okay. It's our trick. It's our trick to make you say our name over and over and over again. We try to make it difficult.
I think I've said it so many times in the past couple of days that now it's becoming a tongue twister. What is the mission of the Environmental Voter Project? Sorry.
We want to so dramatically increase the number of environmentalists who vote that any politician running for office anywhere, local, state, or federal, feels an enormous amount of pressure to lead on climate and environmental issues. That's it. Yeah. We want to build more political power for the environmental movement, because the way we diagnose the problem right now is not that there are a whole bunch of well-meaning politicians, but gosh darn it, they just can't agree on the right policy.
Yeah.
Nor is the problem that, like, we don't have policy solutions out there. Like, no, that's wrong. We have all the policy solutions and technology that we would need to address the climate crisis and toxic air and toxic water and land use problems and habitat destruction. We've got all this stuff.
Yeah.
The problem is a lack of political power. Right now, most politicians don't feel like they need to lead on environmental issues in order to win elections. And so the mission of the Environmental Voter Project is to change that calculus. We want the environmental voting bloc to become so powerful that politicians, that we scare the crap out of politicians.
Yeah.
They can't run for anything without saying, oh my God, I need to make sure those environmentalists vote for me.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
Yeah. It's like how right now a modern politician will be like, you know, especially on a state or local level, will be like, okay, I need to go to a banquet with the police union. I need to get these guys on board with me, perhaps, if that's what my goal is. Or I need to find a way to make sure that all these suburban liberals are on board with me. Like, this is my, you know, these are these swaths of voters that I'm trying to court for whatever reason. But if there was an entire, like you said, a whole section of environmentalists, these are people that are going to vote and they're going to prioritize the environment, the air, the rivers, the trees, the animals, and there's tons of us. They can't ignore those people, and they will have to do the same thing. They might have to have a banquet where a bunch of environmentalists come and hear what they have to say and see if they have any good policies. And that would be a dream come true, for real.
That's right. And, you know, I think an apt analogy is the NRA. You know, the NRA, for good reason, has been thought of as a very, very successful organization. But if you lift up the hood, as people are becoming, you know, sort of more and more aware, it isn't that they have a lot of money. In fact, I think they're about to go bankrupt. It isn't that they are particularly well run. It isn't that they actually spend a lot of money on politics. They don't. It's that they have helped create an army of voters, not non-voters, not regular old citizens, but voters.
Yeah.
Who vote with guns and gun rights as their number one priority. And that, more than anything, is where their power rests. Because there are a lot of politicians who know, they look at this polling data and they say, oh man, 80% of Americans want tougher gun laws. And so many people look at that and they say, oh my gosh, if all these Americans want tougher gun laws, how come the politicians aren't doing it? What are they, stupid? No, they're not stupid.
Yeah.
Because as I just said, politicians don't care about what Americans think. They think about what the actual voters who show up in the elections and decide who wins and loses think. And when you look at that much smaller denominator of the people who actually show up and cast ballots, there are a whole bunch of districts where people who care deeply about gun rights can control who wins and loses elections. That's the kind of power we need in the climate and in the environmental movement.
It's interesting how some of these ideas, they really are simple, and it's the way you're even taught, like, you know, in school, like, this is how politics works. It's who, you know, it's the most voters. These are the kind of people that vote in. But I think, you know, as you get older, you kind of start to forget about it. I think you get tangled up in your own beliefs. And I'm sure that's happened a lot with me, where, you know, I'm constantly like, why doesn't everyone agree with me? and maybe a lot of people really do. Like we said, they're just not out there. They don't have a coalition like the NRA. And that, I think it's in a way it's ironic, but also in a way I think that it's brilliant to try to emulate the NRA with the Environmental Voter Project, to have a coalition of voters that are that powerful and influential.
Yeah. And you know, you're right that the basic sort of arithmetic of politics is something that we all understand from a very early age. But there is one thing that a lot of Americans don't understand about politics. And, you know, forgive me, Doug, if I start pulling you and your audience into the weeds a little bit here, but I think it's so important.
Oh, feel free.
And that is the public voter file. So, what most people know, again, from a very early age, is who you vote for is secret. And that's true.
Mhm.
Who you vote for is secret. No one ever gets to know who you vote for. But what most people don't understand is that whether you vote or not, that is not secret. That is
Oh,
public record. It is public record. Anybody could go into Nashville City Hall and see which elections you voted in and which elections you don't vote in. Now, they'll never know who you voted for,
yeah.
but they do know what, whether you just vote in presidentials or whether you also vote in local and midterms and primaries. And this is not a small thing. This
Yeah.
very concept, the concept of the public voter file, is an essential building block to how all campaigns are run and how all policy is made. Because let me walk you through a scenario here from someone who's run dozens of campaigns. Let's say you are running for governor of Tennessee.
Okay.
All right. And for better or for worse, Doug, you've hired me as your campaign manager. Okay.
All right. I'm feeling good now.
Okay. Well, let me walk you through our first meeting. And this is the same first meeting that everybody has on every campaign. You open up your laptops, you're sitting around a table here, and you look at the public voter file for the state of Tennessee. All right. We have a whole bunch of people over here who aren't even registered to vote. We're not going to talk to them. We have some people over here. Oh, they are registered to vote, but it looks like they never show up and cast a ballot.
Okay.
Oh, here are some people who do vote. Yay. But they only vote in presidential elections. We've got limited time, Doug, and limited money. As your campaign manager, I'm going to say we probably can't talk to them. Oh, here are people who we know vote in gubernatorial elections. Yeah, let's definitely go after them. Oh, and here are people who even vote in local elections. They're like super voters. Let's go after them.
Okay.
And not to put too fine a point on it, not to be creepy, but we literally know these people by name and street address.
Yeah.
And this is how politics works. And so those people who actually vote in the elections that a particular politician is trying to win, those are the people who actually have policymaking power. Because the next decision we're going to make, Doug, on your campaign is, now who are we going to poll to figure out what issues are important? Well, we sure as hell aren't going to poll the people who we just figured out aren't going to show up and vote.
Yeah.
Why on earth would we care what issues they prioritize? They ain't voting. Just like if you're Starbucks, you're not going to care about all the people who don't drink coffee, right? They're not your customers.
They're not your customers. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And so this is why it's so important to make sure that the people who care about your issues are actually showing up and voting, because it is literally public record who votes and who doesn't vote. And politicians are only paying attention to voters, not the non-voters. And you can't really blame them, can you? I mean, they're in the business of winning elections. Of course, they're not going to talk to non-voters.
I mean, you're just going to lose. I guess it's kind of like, I mean, obviously, ethically, you should want to know what everyone in your district or your state or whatever you represent, you should care what they all think. But if you want to win, I guess it really comes down to they don't vote. So you got to talk to the people that do vote. They're the ones that are going to go out and actually cast a ballot. It's your only chance of winning.
That's exactly right. And I know it sounds awful and cynical, but it is something we accept in every other aspect of our lives, right? You don't expect Ford Motor Company to try to sell a car to my 5-year-old. My 5-year-old doesn't drive.
Yeah.
Why on earth would Ford care about 5-year-olds? No, they market their cars to people who can buy them. And politicians market themselves to people who actually vote.
It's funny that you brought up people that only vote in presidential elections. No offense to most of my friends, but that is, I think, the voting habit of most of my friends. And that's sad to say, because I'm like, guys, the president, and I guess it's important who the president, of course it is, but yeah, he's not going to affect maybe where we live and what's going on right here, or the things that I was talking to you about earlier, where I'm like, hey, I really would wish they would stop, getting rid of all of the clean drinking water, destroying all of the green space. you can't expect the president of the United States to come care about development in Nashville. And if all the people that here that will vote in local elections and gubernatorial elections, if none of them prioritize that at all, it never gets addressed.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. I mean, the same dynamic of politicians going where the votes are occurs at the state and local level too.
Yeah.
I mean, mayors are going to talk about public schools and potholes if the only people who vote in mayoral elections care about public schools and potholes. And that's not to say that those are bad things to care about. It's just that mayors need to win elections too.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about climate policy and environmental policy, so many important decisions are made at the state and local level. We live in a country where most utilities are regulated at the state and local level. So the mix of fossil fuel energy or clean energy that heads into the electricity in your house, that is publicly regulated, usually at the state or the local level. Whether there is lead in your pipes, the president isn't dealing with that. Maybe they can turn on the money faucet a little bit to help replace that stuff. But that is happening at the local and state level. And even, you think about big city mayors, they have the ability to tweak zoning laws, parking laws, traffic laws, building codes. All of these things are enormously important. You want to stop all of these cars burning gas and polluting the air? Well, you need your state and local governments to fund public transportation. You want to stop gas furnaces from burning lots of fossil fuels? Well, you need to change zoning codes and building codes. These are things that mayors control.
Yeah.
And that is important to understand, one, just so your buddies will start voting in these elections. But two, remember what I said about sort of the numerators and the denominators of these campaigns, right? You don't win 50% of all the people in your district to get elected.
Yeah.
You need to win 50% of the people who actually show up and vote.
Yeah.
And because so few people vote in local elections, man, if you just get a few hundred more or a few thousand more super environmentalists to show up and vote for mayor, you can not only change who wins and loses these elections, but even if the same people keep on winning, they're at least going to look at their polling data and they're going to say, holy moly, where did all these environmentalists come from? I need to start talking more about how we in Nashville or we in Boise or we in Boston are going to address the climate crisis instead of talking about all these other issues that I thought my voters cared about.
And, not to introduce hyperbole, but it's in my nature. And to talk about just in a mayoral election, the mayor's looking at the people that vote. Of course, that's what the mayor is doing because the mayor has to get elected. And the people that vote, this is what they're saying. They're saying, we want you to fix all the potholes, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. You should fix the potholes.
Right.
And we want a new football stadium. This old football stadium sucks. We want a new one, a better one, like the city next door has, a good one. And this ends up being the top priority. It's just when you're looking at the voters want the stadium and they want the potholes. And so this is what the mayor is focused on entirely. And at the same time, let's just say a mining corporation has come in and said, I've got a lot of money for you to help you get elected and get all these pothole people and stadium people on board. All you got to let me do is do some mountaintop removal so I can extract some nickel and poison all the groundwater. Mayor's going to let him do it because the mayor's just a politician. And so the next day, or not the next day, but, a couple months later, you turn on your faucet, your water's brown. And it's because, all you did was vote in the presidential election. I don't know. I said, hyperbole is in my nature.
No. And it's a good analogy. But even if, even when we elect the so-called right people, even when your mayor isn't like some, villain twirling their mustache, they still need to pick and choose what to spend their political capital on. It isn't like they can just snap their fingers and get whatever they want done. And most major American cities have fairly progressive mayors who probably do want to lead on climate and the environment. But if the voters who help elect them have other things that they prioritize more than climate and the environment, that's what mayors are going to spend their time and effort on. Like we need to spend our political capital wisely. And here's a perfect example, not of a mayor, but of a president we probably all know, and we remember this moment in time. When Barack Obama was elected, he had a veto-proof majority in the Senate, not for a very long time, but for a short time, and controlled the House. And two things were going on at that moment in time. They were trying to pass Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and there was the Waxman-Markey sort of carbon pricing bill going through Congress. And the Obama White House, and I say this as someone who was a fan of President Obama, I'm not trying to dump on them, and if you ask anybody who served in those first 2 years, they will tell you this story. They were sitting there and they were saying, okay, it's going to be hard to get both of these things over the goal line.
Yeah.
What are we going to spend our political capital on?
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking at polling data, and they saw 26 or 27% of voters listing healthcare as their number one priority, and 2% listing climate change as their top priority.
That's the 2% again.
And like, if I was his chief of staff, I would have said, listen, dummy, you spend your political capital on the thing that like 27% of voters care about. Like, of course they spend it on that. And that's a perfect example of like, even the right politicians, even the good leaders can't just get whatever the hell they want.
Yeah.
They need to look at the voters and realize that there's support for them to lead on climate.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, those are tough decisions too, because obviously healthcare is extremely important, and it's not just extremely popular, it's also extremely important. Like, you can't, but you know what? I want it all, man. I want people to have healthcare, and I want to protect the planet that I live on. And this leads me to a question, and I know this might be difficult to answer, but I'm sure you've done a lot of research, so you're obviously the best person to ask. And it's just that, why don't some environmentalists vote? Why aren't they? I mean, because clearly they care. Why don't they go vote their conscience?
Yeah. So there are some things that we know and some things that we don't know. And I think that's important to just say right up front, because at the Environmental Voter Project, we do a lot of experiments. We try to be very scientifically rigorous. And so when there are things that are conjecture, I want to be very careful and say, like, I think this is what's going on, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to measure why people don't do things. For a whole bunch of reasons. But let me tell you what we do know. The first is people who care deeply about climate and other environmental issues are disproportionately young, they are disproportionately people of color, and they are disproportionately lower income. And what do those three groups have in common? Poor people, young people, and people of color. They are always the object of voter suppression efforts. If anybody anywhere is trying to make it harder for someone to vote, chances are they are targeting people of color, poor people, or young people.
Yeah.
And so we in the environmental movement needs to understand that ballot access is a problem for us. And that's part of the reason why a lot of our messaging at the Environmental Voter Project, yes, it's informed by behavioral science and we know it works, but a lot of it is just letting people know that there's an election coming up and these are the ways that they can vote. It's simple access things. So that's one thing. The second reason why environmentalists are disproportionately awful voters is, for decades, even generations, Doug, the environmental movement has been strangely apolitical. And here's what I mean by that. If you think about when you were a kid, what it meant to be environmental, chances are you thought of, recycling or picking up litter, or maybe, riding a bike instead of driving, or changing how you eat, or even now, changing the electricity you consume. And all of these are good things, but they're all weirdly apolitical, right? Like they have nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you care about guns or you care about reproductive rights, like you would never talk that way. You would just talk about politics.
Yeah.
And so we've grown up since like the 50s and 60s in the environmental movement, thinking that the way to be a good environmentalist is by changing our personal habits. And I don't want to poo-poo that. That's very important.
Mm-hmm.
But it has nothing to do with politics. And there's a reason why. There's a reason why it has nothing to do with politics. It's because the fossil fuel industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in PR campaigns, essentially telling us, hey, Doug, don't pay attention to that coal-fired power plant over there. This whole problem is actually your fault for buying a plastic water bottle. You are the problem, Doug. You need to change, not us. Don't pay attention to our coal-fired power plant. It's not our fault. Which is, of course, total BS.
Yes.
But they have changed the way we think about this all these environmental problems, so that we don't think of them as systemic political problems. Instead, we think of them as like our own fault, as we're screwing up.
I just have to step in here because this is one of the things that I have found the most infuriating about this, just for as long as I can remember, but like when BP lights the ocean on fire and I'm being told that climate change is an issue of personal responsibility, that I don't recycle enough. You know what? I ate a hamburger and I did it. I'm the fucking problem. And that's
right.
And at the same time, these cruise ships, are just massive, like cities floating on the ocean, dumping tons and tons and tons of like garbage and human waste into these delicate ecosystems. And like we were just saying, these propaganda machines are saying it's actually your responsibility as an individual to solve this. It's what are you doing drinking out of a plastic water bottle, you monster? So anyway, right. I had to step in because I find that to be the most infuriating, maybe of all things, is that propaganda mechanism that has made people think that because even if every single person did their best, what are we, like 15% of the problem? There's 85% of the problem is still going to be industrial.
Totally. Now, as someone who lives behavioral science, I don't want to say that it is unimportant what we do.
Yeah, I kind of came off that way, and I'm sorry.
Right, but ultimately, there's a difference between being able to affect change, which we are able to do as individuals, and being guilty, being responsible for a problem, which we are not. We are not responsible for the climate crisis. 15 or 20 fossil fuel companies are poisoning our air and water and killing human beings. They are literally killing human beings. That is not your fault for getting a plastic water bottle or eating a hamburger. It is not your fault. Can you do something as an individual to change the world for the better? Absolutely. But it is not your fault that it got this way.
Yeah, and I mean, to backtrack a little bit on what I just said, I do think that when you have the opportunity to use like a canteen, like that's what I mostly use. I actually don't really use a lot of plastic water bottles. This propaganda did work on me, and I don't really eat a lot of hamburgers. Like I don't really eat meat that much at all. Period. That's for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it's really just because I hate that the rainforest is being burnt down to turn into cattle ranches for McDonald's. So, so yes, absolutely. 100%. I think that there is personal responsibility and people should take it. And that's a good thing. Of course, and I agree with you 100%, though. The problem here is being guilted or being led to believe that we're the leading problem when we are last place.
Totally.
Can
Totally.
I can I uh can I ask you something also that this is going to be a touchy subject, but it just has to be said because I mean, and you've already brought up. I mean, we do keep coming back to fossil fuel industry, and that might just be the answer. But why do some people consider the environment to be a partisan issue? Why can't this be something that? Why can't if you're a conservative, let's say you're not a politician. Let's just say you're a conservative. Why can't you care about climate change? Is that fair? Am I being a little bit harsh, or am I making it more partisan the way I'm asking it?
No, no, I don't think you are. And it's
I don't understand. I don't understand
yeah.
why does this have to be a why does it have to be for Democrats to be environmental? Why can't this be both sides of the aisle?
I think it comes back to the fact that nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing elections.
Yeah.
And since Citizens United, it has been very hard for Republicans to win many primaries unless they deny climate science and subsidize big oil and gas.
Yeah.
And it's so important to see it through that framework, not because I want everybody to be like hard-headed cynicists. No, just the opposite. I want us to understand that politics is so transactional that we are actually empowered as activists. We are empowered as voters. Because what was not the case was that anti-environmentalism is a bedrock value of conservative ideology. Like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who have conservative values who care deeply about the environment and want to address the climate crisis and accept science. The problem is, especially since Citizens United, it is very hard for conservative politicians to lead on those values. And so my hope is that, like, after becoming more and more and more cynical about politics, well, you know, your listeners will finally break through and realize that, like, oh, actually, if politicians will do whatever it takes to get elected, that means that, like, I actually do have power as an activist. Yeah. I actually do have power as a voter, because ultimately my vote is the only thing they care about. And so I think that's why it is partisan, because it didn't used to be this way. It didn't used to be this way. And I'm not counseling that we should all come together in the middle and have a kumbaya moment. Like, no, I am not one of those people. Yeah. Politics is about winning and losing, and most politicians just want power. So our job as people who care deeply about climate and environmental issues is to get so much power that we scare the bejesus out of those politicians. That's our job.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, then we're going to solve a whole lot of these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that glacial movement. Do you mind if I share a very short anecdote that I just heard? I believe I just heard it yesterday. It's about a rancher in Wyoming. Just speaking about, like, what you were saying, like, obviously not all people that have conservative values don't also care deeply about the environment. It just happens to be, you know, in Washington, it's a big problem because we've got Citizens United, and it's making it hard for, or basically impossible for, certain people to do, you know, to get elected and do the right thing. But there was this is what I was hearing. It was a mine. I don't know if you've heard the story. There was a mine in Wyoming, and they were digging up. I don't even know what kind of ore they were going for, but they were doing a lot of these, like, very, very destructive practices. You know, like some of the, like, the worst type of mining you can do, and it had poisoned all the water. So this rancher, he's a cattle rancher, was like, I can't water my cattle now because of this. And first of all, I want to say that cattle ranchers are oftentimes some of the most conservative people you're ever going to find on the planet. But this guy was like, this is wrong, what they're doing to our land and the environment. And he became an activist. He created a whole movement. He beat the mines ended up becoming a sole proprietor of that land, and then wouldn't sell back. There was several of the ranchers that wanted to buy their part back, and he's like, no, because you kept reselling, because a new mining company would come in every few years, drill out the stuff, and then get out before the lawsuits hit. Right. And then, so they've been doing it forever. And he's like, no, anyone that ever sold to these mining corporations, you can't have your land back. This is protected land now. So that's just a story of a guy. Right. I don't know him personally. I don't know much about him, but I'm gonna go ahead and assume he's a Wyoming cattle rancher. He's got some pretty conservative values, and he clearly gives a shit about the land. And on the other hand, I would say that a lot of these politicians, that are running on a conservative ballot, these are people who hold law degrees from Ivy League schools, who mostly, eat fine dining and, wear $10,000 suits. And then when you see them in their ads, they're in a giant muddy pickup truck with a giant gun, shooting a rifle out of the back of their pickup truck. And so, that's the performative politics side of it. I know that was a huge tangent, but I'm just saying.
It wasn't a huge tangent. I mean, I think it shows two very important things. And that is that, the first is that most environmental issues fit perfectly within both a progressive value system and a conservative value system. And that's important to realize.
Yeah.
And then the second thing it shows is that, again, I'm sounding like a broken record here. Politicians go where the votes are.
Yeah.
They go where the votes are. And again, I don't want to make it seem like Republicans are the villains. Like, Democrats do it too.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I happen to think that Bernie Sanders is very good and one of the most honest people in politics. When all he cared about was winning statewide in Vermont, he actually had a pretty good score from the NRA.
Oh, really?
And then he completely changed his views on a lot of gun issues when he ran for president. And can you blame him?
No,
can you blame him?
Yeah.
No, and Bernie Sanders, I am holding up as maybe someone who is one of the most courageous politicians when it comes to saying things that are potentially unpopular. And so I don't want to hold him up as a villain. I'm actually holding him up as someone who is perhaps more heroic than most politicians.
But he's got to play the game.
You don't get to be a politician unless you get enough votes to be a politician.
Yeah.
It's just how it works. It's just how it works. And so again, it is both incumbent on us, but also it should be empowering to us to realize that ultimately politicians are going to come to voters. And so if we vote in every single election up and down the ballot, even for dog catcher and library trustee, politicians are going to follow or they're going to be out of a job.
Yeah. And it's a brutal business because, it's like, let's say, you don't want to shove people. You don't want to push people. It makes you feel bad. You don't like being mean, but you want to be on the hockey team. That's the game, man. If you want to be on the hockey team, you got to go on there and you got to shove people. So it's kind of like in politics. You got to go in there and you got to do things that maybe you would prefer not to do if you were a private citizen. I don't know. I don't know if that's a fair analogy, but I'm a real analogy machine today. I did want to because I know we've kind of gone into some of the the less happy places in here, talking about Citizens United and some of these other things. So what I really did want to ask though, maybe just going up to a brighter point, what are some of the greatest successes that the Environmental Voter Project has had since you started?
So I'll think about sort of something on sort of a grand scale and then something on a small scale. So first on the grand scale, since we launched now about a little bit over 6 years ago, we have canvassed and called and texted and mailed and sent digital ads to over 8.7 million individual voters. Obviously, some of them we've communicated with tons of times for lots of different elections.
Mm-hmm.
And every single one of these 8.7 million individuals listed climate or some other environmental issue as their top priority. And they were a pretty awful voter. Because if you don't have those two things, we're not going to bother reaching out to you.
Yeah.
At the end of last year, over 1 million of those 8.7 million, we had helped to become such consistent voters that they had voted in their most recent federal election, their most recent state election, and even their most recent local election. They had become super voters. They had gone from non-voters to super voters, such that even if there is a library trustee race, these environmentalists are now showing up and voting. And that is something that we are enormously proud of, because those million new voters,
Yeah.
they can really, really drive policymaking. Now, we've got a whole lot more work to do, because there's still 9, 10, maybe even 11 million non-voting environmentalists still out there. Not to mention, every year, a whole bunch of new young people, and young people tend to care more about the environment, start registering to vote, and we need to help them become consistent voters. But that is something we're enormously proud of, and we're very grateful to our donors and our volunteers for helping us make that happen. The second thing that we're really, really proud of on sort of a smaller scale is, my guess is many of your listeners remember January 2021, when there were those 2 U.S. Senate runoff elections happening in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
That ended up deciding control of the United States Senate. Well, over $1 billion were spent in those 2 elections. $1 billion with a B.
Insane.
Insane is correct.
So much money.
$1 billion. We, little old environmental voter project, we spent $550,000. Not a small amount, but nowhere close to $1 billion with a B. We could tell from our randomized control trials, these are very rigorous scientific experiments, we could tell that we were solely responsible for boosting turnout of environmental voters 0.9 percentage points. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but almost 1%, that's like everything in politics.
Yeah.
Ask Donald Trump how big a deal 1% is in Georgia. He'll tell you.
Yeah.
We were solely responsible, amidst all that noise, boosting turnout of environmental voters almost 1 percentage point. And that is something else that we're enormously proud of, because yes, our ultimate goal is this long-term growth of power in the environmental movement, but we also recognize that the only way to turn a non-voter into a voter is to have them vote in an election. And even in these really expensive, busy, important elections, our volunteers and our data scientists are doing such good work that we're isolating the right people and the right messages to deliver to them, that even in those huge elections, we can make a big, big difference. And we're so proud of having those election-specific impacts, but also those long-term impacts.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, is like, when you look at these numbers too, like, you might know this number better than me, but what is it, like 150 million Americans don't vote or something like that? Does that sound like about right? I mean, it's obviously different from election to election, but yeah. But like 1 million folks, that's a lot of people. And like you were saying, creating an entire percentage point, especially in a place where there's such a slim margin, you could think that this is the kind of thing, if you continue to grow, you get enough people that are environmentalists, they don't vote. Now they do vote. Now they're a force. Maybe this is just a dream. I'm just throwing a dream out here, but maybe next time that $1 billion could be spent, given it to like the top researchers on climate change, for like the best solutions to some of these problems, or $1 billion to protect, to purchase and protect whatever $1 billion worth of rainforest costs.
Right.
So many things that $1 billion could have bought that would have been so good for the world. So, this grassroots approach, man, it would be just amazing if the dream, if it's just like, it's a force, they got to deal with it, they got to reckon with it. They can't be bought. These people are here for the environment. might as well spend your money on saving the environment. I don't know.
That's right. That's right. And the great thing, I mean, no matter how proud I am of all of the experiments that we do and how precise our messaging is and things like that, the dirty little secret of why we're so successful at the Environmental Voter Project is simply because we're really stubborn, and no election is too small for us to get involved with. And so I also think it's important to understand that these points of leverage, these moments in time where we can make a difference politically, don't just happen once every 2 years when there's a big, sexy federal election going on. No, they happen all the time. Whenever there's a primary or a special or a local election or a state election, for two reasons. One, many of those local elections can actually control important environmental and climate policies. But even if they don't, because let's admit it, there are plenty of races that have nothing to do with environmental policymaking.
Yeah.
Those elections still have a lot to do with changing voters' habits. And so even now, the end of January in 2023, the Environmental Voter Project has already been involved in 11 different elections. Not because all of them are important when it comes to climate policymaking, but because all of them are extraordinarily important if you're trying to change people's behavior, if you're trying to talk to non-voters and get them in the habit of voting more often. And so if anybody is interested in volunteering to mobilize these voters, they can go to our website and sign up and volunteer for a phone bank. It's completely nonpartisan, but we know who these voters are. We know the messages that we need to deliver to them to turn them from crappy voters into consistent voters. And all we need is this manpower to get it done.
That's exactly literally where I was just about to go. Was what the thing was, I was a little bit concerned about sounding like a hypocrite because I know I got on my soapbox a little earlier in the podcast and talking about how BP shouldn't be telling me to take individual responsibility for anything. However, I think I did a pretty good job of backpedaling there and saying individual responsibility is important, and that's what I was gonna say. And I know you just started talking about it, but what can people do as individuals to help? What can they do for the Environmental Voter Project? What can they do maybe in their communities? Like what can, like, I mean, just so people feel like that there's a way to take action right now. Like what can they do?
Yeah. So they can go to our website, environmentalvoter.org, and it is extremely easy to just say, oh, yeah, I want to sign up for that phone bank. Or I want to knock on doors, or I want to send postcards to these non-voting environmentalists. We will train you over Zoom. We'll train you online. You can do all this stuff from your house. We will give you the messaging that we know works. You're not going to be twisting someone's arm to convince them to care about climate or to vote for a particular candidate. It's a very easy ask. You're talking to people who already care about these issues.
Yeah, they're already on your side.
To vote. Right. And so that's a very easy thing. The second thing, we are a nonprofit, but it takes money to mobilize voters. And so we run on donations. We would always welcome donations, even if it's $1 or $2. It makes a big difference. And then the final thing I would just say is, even if volunteering or supporting our work at the Environmental Voter Project isn't right for you, what you should always do is recognize that all of us have power over our friends and neighbors. And that power comes from the fact that we are a social species. We look to each other to see what is appropriate behavior. And so for all of your listeners, I would say, if you care deeply about climate and environmental issues, be loud and proud about the fact that you are a voter. Because when you are posting on Instagram, or when you are talking to your friends or things like that, they are looking to you. They are looking to you for cues as to what environmentalists do. And if they see you and they say, oh, well, he votes all the time because he cares about climate or he cares about the environment, that is going to make them more likely to do it too. So be
Yeah,
loud and proud about being an environmental voter, because we are
absolutely.
a really hyper social species, and you need to let everybody know how important this is to you.
I couldn't agree with that more. That yeah, be loud, be proud who you are. Yeah, tell your friends what you think and feel. Tell people that disagree with you what you think and feel. I would want to share one little thing because there's a guy at the dog park. He might be listening because he knows about this podcast. But he all the podcasts he listens to, in my opinion, are the opposite of me. They're the opposite of everything I stand for. He's a very let's just say his beliefs are really, really, really oppositional to mine. But he's a nice guy and he's funny. And we take our dogs to the park at the same time of day all the time. So I talk to him all the time. But I'm chipping away at him. I feel like because he's a nice guy and we're civil, and he knows that I flat out disagree with everything he believes in, and I know that he flat out disagrees with everything I believe in. But I'm just sitting there and I'm like, yeah, well, man, think about it like this. Think about it like that. Like I don't let him just get away with anything he says. And I'm starting to believe. I think I'm getting through to him. I think I am.
Yeah, and oftentimes, getting through to someone can mean a lot of different things, right? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you need to like win an argument and force them to say, oh, I was wrong, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about subtly creating this permission structure for them to realize, you know what? I can be conservative and still care about these things that progressives care about too.
Yeah.
Or I can still be a guy who likes to watch, Fox News, but also thinks that we should not like cut down all the trees in this beautiful forest next to the dog park.
Yeah.
And they're not going to come to that realization on their own. They're going to come to that realization talking to people who they share things with. Maybe not all of their value system, but share things with. And it works both ways. Maybe you'll come to realize that this guy who you disagree with on a lot of stuff, actually, like, maybe you do agree with him on this one thing.
Oh yeah.
And that's okay. That's
Yeah.
totally okay. And again, I say this as someone who doesn't like fetishize moderation. I am not a political moderate. Believe me, I am not. I don't think that we should always just try to agree. No, but I do think we should always talk to each other and recognize that there are these points of agreement and we should not shut them out.
It's very funny that you mentioned that because we do agree on like, so here's I'm not going to go off on this, but there's a perfect example. And we both agree that big pharma is a little out of control.
Right.
But sadly, for very different reasons, do we believe this? and I'm not going to get into it, but I'm going to say that the reason he thinks that big pharma is out of control is not the right reason. But I think like last time we spoke, I think I got to him a little bit. I was like, well, yeah, their lobbying is out of control. The money and getting into it's out of control. But I was like, but some of these other things you're saying are wrong.
You got to take what you can get, man. You got to take what you can get.
Nathaniel, man, I just got to ask you one more question. I know you just said so much, but just so no one forgets, the website, in case anyone wants to volunteer, where people can follow you, of course, and the Environmental Voter Project, and any other resources or anything else you'd like to share.
Yes. So thank you. So our website is environmentalvoter.org. As far as following me on Twitter, I'm NC Stinn. So for Nathaniel Stinnett. So NCSTINN, or they can follow the Environmental Voter Project at enviro_voter. On Instagram, we're at Environmental Voter. And we have a YouTube page. You can search for us. Facebook, we're all over. And again, awesome. Get involved. I promise you, if you don't like it, then just stop. No one's going to force you to keep on volunteering, but give it a shot.
Yeah.
We make it so easy, and I can take credit for this because I had nothing to do with it. It's all of our organizing staff. Yeah. Man, they make it so easy for people to volunteer, and most people end up loving it and coming back for more. So give it a shot. I
speak from personal experience. when you just get out and volunteer, especially for something that that you really believe in, man, it makes you feel just at the end of the day, that's an just a completely unique feeling. It's a good feeling, and it's kind of unlike anything else. So I highly recommend it. Nathaniel, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on the My Views Around podcast and talk to me, man.
Well, it was my pleasure, Doug. It was so awesome. I loved this conversation, and I appreciate you having me.